Hey there, 8-Footmanchild. This is my reply to your two-part series. I will be reading it to save time, and because it was so packed full of information, I needed a script to go by instead of relying on my sporadic thoughts. So here we go. Your two-part video was so packed full of information and conjecture that I have found the task of choosing what to say in response a bit daunting. I suppose I could rant on in a series of videos, but I wanted to do my best to boil all of this down to my top 3 points, and then possibly PM or email follow-ups and other related topics to you. I don't mind if this turns into a series of exchanges, but I wanted to at least make one video for now and see where it goes from there. I'm going to title this The Fish Tank because it appropriately addresses the analogy that I'm going to use often in this video in my counterpoints to you. However, to better understand where I'm going with this, I have 3 main points that are going to follow from that title. Point 1, addressing this as your personal choice. Point 2, then kind of attacking your premise as I believe it to be flawed. And then point 3, attempting to actually meet your challenge and play your game. Now within some of these points, I do have sub-points. I couldn't help but do so. And in those cases, I will refer to those points as A, B, C, D, and so forth, kind of like an outline. Point 1, your personal choice. Firstly, I will approach your series from a very literal interpretation of the idea that you are sharing with us to be your own personal choice rather than an edict that you expect all atheists to follow. As such, I say bravo. You are thinking critically. You are throwing out preconceived ideas and notions, and essentially, you're laying the groundwork to be able to look at things through a fresh pair of eyes. I applaud this effort to disown labels and start over. I've done something like that myself in my own story. And while I don't think you believe anything will actually change, I'm hoping that if you are sincere to search for answers, that it just might. In a nutshell, your premise, though exacting with demands of proof and to some degree to some degree is taking a big step back and stating more of an agnostic assertion rather than a definitive atheistic one. So while I find your challenge and exercise to be flawed and very difficult in many ways, it is essentially asking for something to be presented or offered to you before you decide how to react to it. The irony, of course, from this is, should I actually be able to show you or give you a primary character or body to assign traits to, then there would be no real decision to make about it. You would simply believe it since proof would have been absolutely produced. And that leads me into point 2, which is why your premise is flawed. And there's lots of little components to this one, so bear with me. Your premise is flawed from the start. When I commented that you were being intellectually dishonest by giving an impossible challenge, I was not inferring that it's impossible to show evidence for God and inform you of the mechanisms by which I have come to my conclusions, but rather it's impossible based on the criteria and rules that you define the challenge by. A, the fish tank scenario. This is where my analogy comes into play. Say everything in the universe could be boiled down to a fish tank, and there are 2 fish living in this tank, you and me. We often talk in our many conversations about what may or may not be outside of our tank. I often speculate that there is something out there and even go a step further to define it as pet owner. You speculate as well and say that nothing outside of our tank exists. For you to be absolutely honest with your challenge here, you would have to admit that my premise set up against yours stands a 50-50 chance of odds as to whether I'm correct or not. The reason I state that is because you kind of make it sound as though this is not even a discussion worthy of having, because until or unless a body can be produced, there's nothing for you to disbelieve in. Well, I get it, but 50-50 chances mean that I'm just as likely to be right about this as you are, so I believe it's a worthy discussion to have. Of course, odds don't fare well for the atheist perspective at all when you start analyzing the random chance calculations against the framework of what it takes for life to even exist, but I digress. Let's take the fish tank scenario further. Let's say you get fed up with our talks about this and demand to know what informs me of pet owner in the first place, and by what mechanisms I claim to know any of his secondary characteristics. I talked to you about how the water and rocks and treasure chests and fake plants surely did not come from nowhere. I go further to theorize that the fact that you and I even exist must mean that we were created, and most likely with a purpose of some kind. I go further and tell you that I found a book at the bottom of our tank, and it speaks to pet owners' characteristics. Of course, you assert that none of this is proof of anything, and you can equally conclude that it's random chance. C. Free will. My beliefs that were actually informed by my personal experiences, evidence captured in Christian scripture, observations of our natural world, all include a narrative of free will. I practice this every day by choosing what to wear, what to eat, when to wake up in the morning, etc. For God to allow free will, he also has to limit his interference with it, or else he cancels out the premise altogether. After all, how much choice is there really when you believe, as to whether you believe in him or not, if he sits at the end of your bed and constantly checks in on you saying, boo? D. A constant. Scientists have always understood the need for a constant in order that everything actually exists as it does. But rather than go with the theistic idea as it has been proposed, the scientific explanation has usually been, up until recently, that the universe itself was indeed the constant, essentially eliminating the need for a deity or creator. It has always existed and always will, therefore making life and all that happens in this fish tank possible. Well, science has also recently figured out in the last century that the universe actually did have a beginning, and that theory that it had always existed had been proven wrong. It might then make some sense to question whether the constant is indeed a creator and a physical mind that lives outside of space and time as the theist believes, but no. Now science is asserting a multiverse theory. Yet even with the newest assertion, your camp is not denying the need to explain an outside source or constant. I find that interesting, and you don't really address that in your videos, or at least not the two that I watched. E. Proof. Not only does proof violate free will, but there would be no decision to make if 100% proof in the tangible manner that you're asking for it was presented. This is partly where I accuse you of intellectual dishonesty. You know that there is a component to my belief system called faith. But unlike the definition of delusion, faith is defined as something that is believed without absolute proof. Not no proof, but without absolute proof. Delusion, which is what you and your camp often accuse us of, is believing in something despite the fact that it has been proven wrong. My third point, and I will try and run through this quick.